Okay, I think we're live. So welcome to this week's Chen Chat. So it's Monday the 29th of September. Another month disappears under our very feet, really, or it seems to be that way. I think everything now is Christmas focused. We noticed in the shops the other day, or certainly the garden centres down here in the UK, they're starting to bring all the Christmas things out in September. You can't believe it. Seems to get earlier every year. Okay, so welcome to this chat. We'll wait for a few people to get logged in. Obviously, the comment section is open, so anyone can ask questions in the comments. We'll do our best to answer them. For anyone listening to the podcast in catch-up, so we're going to talk about narcissistic people today, or probably, I guess, more correctly termed, how we deal with narcissistic people. So we're all aware that we've been around narcissistic people. We kind of know what the traits are. We're going to cover narcissism and the people that have those traits, why they have those traits, kind of what goes on in their life, why they treat people the way they do. And then, of course, we're going to look at how we kind of counter that, really, certainly from a kind of evidential spiritual perspective. So people that are narcissistic have narcissistic personality disorder. Most people, certainly in my experience, really, that are spiritual, have narcissism in their family somewhere, whether it's your direct family, so it could be your parents, siblings, or grandparents, or if not in your direct family, then normally they're in your kind of extended circle. So again, most people are aware of someone that they're dealing with on a very frequent day-to-day basis that is narcissistic. So it's quite an interesting topic. I know lots of people talk about it. Lots of people have asked us to talk about narcissism and to get Chen's kind of opinion on what narcissism is, why it happens, how we deal with people that have NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, and whether people are born like it, I guess, is another question that comes up a lot in our conversations and chats. So are narcissistic people kind of born that way, or are they, I guess, formed or made that way is probably a better way to say it. So I'm just wait for Jane to give me a quick heads up on the audio, check the audio is working okay, and you guys can hear us okay. So if you guys are in the Facebook chats or YouTube, if you can just put a thumbs up or just give us a quick comment to say that everything is good. It'll save me talking to myself for an hour and then realise that no one's listening, or well, I can see people are listening but can hear me properly, which is the key thing. Okay, so let's have a quick look over to comments. Okay, so Jane's saying loud and clear, Captain. Nice to be the captain. Captain's the guy that stands there with the wheel and just kind of steers the ship. So it's quite a nice position to be in. Although we both know that Jane's probably the captain and I'm probably in the engine room shoveling the coal into the very hot boiler, more likely. So hi to Maura, good to have you here, and Vicky. I think that's Hope as well, just joining, which is cool. Good to see you folks. Afternoon from the US of A, which is cool. And we've actually got good weather in the UK, so which is nice to see. So just for you, those of you that are just joining now, so we're going to talk about narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder, how we kind of deal with people that are narcissistic, and go over that topic basically. So hi to Camille too. Good to have you here. Okay, so really from my perspective, so narcissism. So we think about narcissistic people. What would a narcissistic person kind of look like? What is their sort of personality? We also know that there's obviously a disorder that is kind of narcissistic personality disorder. So really, from my perspective, I guess the signs that people are narcissistic. So things that we could think about really. One, or the main thing really, I think for most of us, is a lack of empathy. So someone that is not empathic at all, they seem to dismiss or ignore our feelings, basically. And lots of people do that. Doesn't mean that the person that does that is narcissistic. But when we group together the characteristics that we're going to talk about, then we kind of start to look at someone that could well be narcissistic or have that narcissistic personality disorder. So number two really on my list is kind of gaslighting. So they basically twist everything to make you doubt yourself. And I guess we've all been around people that we think we're right and we think we understand things, and then we kind of get gaslit. And I guess gaslighting is quite a modern term. It's certainly one that's not been in my kind of spectrum for too long, really. But again, certainly there are, and we've all come across people that whatever you say, they twist the conversation and generally keep talking. And I think this is one of the key things for me, really, when I'm talking to people, when you start to notice they are narcissistic, they basically don't stop talking, and they kind of bend the conversation and twist it, and twist your reality to kind of make you start doubting yourself, even if they treat you in ways that aren't particularly good. So for me, the third thing really is control. We've got old control manipulation that we all can associate with. So they tend to use guilt and fear or charm to sort of dominate us in that way. And again, we all know people that will try one thing to another. And certainly most of you, probably, certainly spiritual people, will have had people very close to you in your life, partners, wives, husbands, that probably the control and manipulation is the key pointer to them being quite narcissistic, I would more than imagine, really. And then we move to kind of entitlement again. So narcissistic people seem to be very entitled. They do seem really to expect special treatment without kind of giving too much back in return. And that's one of the things that I've personally sort of experienced with the narcissistic people that I've come across in my life, is that they seem to be okay for you to go to work, and they kind of don't have to. It seems to be okay for you to work very long hours, and again, they don't seem to have to. So this entitlement trait seems to be there with most narcissistic people. And then I guess the sort of idealism really and devaluation cycle comes round and round. One minute they put you on a pedestal, and then they tear you back down off it again. And the next thing you know, you're back up on the pedestal again. And then the next thing you know, you're back down off the pedestal again. So you kind of end up in this sort of to-ing and fro-ing, backwards and forwards in sort of situation, really, which again isn't particularly good. It's not particularly good for everyone to experience. And it certainly points to narcissism, really. So I guess from that perspective, looking at those signs, so we've got lack of empathy, sort of gaslighting, control and manipulation, entitlement, and then that kind of idealization and devaluation cycle goes round and round. So number one trait for me, really, narcissistic people, it's the lack of empathy, I think, that comes in. They sort of struggle to truly recognize or care about anybody else's feelings, and they kind of generally dismiss other people's emotions as though they're not important at all, really, or completely unimportant, I guess. So that again comes up time and time again when we look at kind of the narcissistic traits of people. So for me, again, I've kind of got to the point that I think I've got to the age, I guess, more than to the point, really, in my life that I can kind of identify narcissistic people very quickly, and they get moved into my outer circle even faster, basically. So when people come into your circle, we generally kind of work on the basis that we won't judge people until we kind of know them and experience what they're like. So I try and keep that open behaviour, and I know Jane does too. So when we meet new people, you might have an opinion, but you kind of keep the opinion back until you actually have experience. And if you don't really have an experience with them, then it's probably best not to judge people. And there's lots of people that come into your life that have done bad things or negative things, or they've had difficult lives generally. And I think it's okay to accept the background, and then we just kind of form an opinion of them based upon their treatment towards us. And that's the way that we try and live our lives. We try and live our lives in a way that, even though we might have some people in our circle that have done not particularly fantastic things, if they're doing good things today and they're trying to better themselves and they're working to their highest good, then that's what they get judged on. And I think that's the way that we as a society should judge people, really, is in the way that they behave today, not the things that they did in the past. And of course, again, I'm sure we've all got people in our circles that we can sort of spring to mind and think about that come with a bit of a flowery past. But again, age tends to calm people down. So certainly I know, myself and other people that I was aware of in your younger days, you tend to be a bit more full of energy, slightly a bit more testosterone, you kind of be a bit more excitable in situations. As you get older, you tend to relax back and sit back into things and don't make opinions quite so fast, don't make decisions quite so quickly. And certainly, again, from my perspective, if we get emails that are quite difficult or people are being difficult in emails, my kind of response is not to respond. So we don't respond. So we just leave that email for a day. Basically, don't allow yourself to kind of get connected to the energy of something or a situation, and then come back at it with a fresh pair of eyes the next day, read it again, and then from a very kind of non-emotional perspective, you can generally orchestrate a better reply. Whereas when we get something that kind of pushes our buttons or finds a trigger, we kind of jump to the trigger, and then you kind of all guns blazing to go back with your opinion or your version of things. And again, narcissistic people, that's what they're looking for. They're looking to find the trigger. And if they can find your trigger, generally they hop on it as fast as possible and keep pulling it. And then you find yourself being drawn into some big sort of traumatic chaos, generally, that most narcissistic people seem to like. And I know from my perspective, one of the things Jane and I try and do is keep chaos out of our life. So we're very, very protecting our space. We're protecting ourselves individually, and also ourselves as a kind of couple together, really. And we do the same with our family members. So our family members are basically protected on a daily basis. We do kind of psychic protection, call things like to Chen, try and stop any interference. And then when people come into the circle, which of course they do get brought into the circle one way or another, then effectively they're sort of evaluated upon their energy, the way they say things and do things. And again, anyone that starts to create any level of turmoil or chaos in our lives finds themselves out the door very quickly. And it's certainly, I find that certainly works really well now. Obviously 20 years ago was a different story, but these days that's kind of how things work. And again, it's about boundaries. And I guess this is kind of moving on to where we are in this conversation, that we've sort of covered what narcissistic traits narcissistic people have, what they do, how they work, how they try to look for triggers and chaos and problems and things. And then kind of how do we deal with them? Because of course, if you've got these people in your life, we need to deal with them. So for me, really, it's all about sort of protecting yourself, which number one thing would be boundaries. So setting very clear boundaries. So being very specific, really, about behaviours that we will and won't accept. So again, when people come into your circle, or people that are in your circle, if they know what you will and won't accept, then you've got that boundary, you've got that line. And you state your limits very calmly, consistently. And then, of course, the key, really, not just with narcissistic people, I think, but with most people that we work with, come across, are in relationships with, it's about being consistent with the consequences. So the same as with children, if you cross a line, something has to happen. There has to be a consequence. So we look at lots of people, those that train animals, train dogs. If a dog does something good, then you give it a treat. So you continue to give it a treat, reinforce, repeat and reinforce, do something good, get a treat, do something bad, no attention. So dogs and other animals generally kind of looking for attention. And if you give them positive attention, then you get positive behaviour. If they do something wrong or they're naughty and they don't get the attention, they don't get the treats, then you're training them not to do it. And I guess it's kind of worth thinking about using the same dog training techniques with your family, with your friends, with people around you, basically, that those people that treat you well, speak to you in the right way, work with you, help you, support you, they obviously get kind of rewarded to a certain degree by your time and by your love and by your space and by your energy. But if they're continually creating problems in your life and creating chaos, animosity, difficulty, negative behaviours, then there has to be a consequence. And generally the consequence, obviously, in those cases would be to kind of detach emotionally. And that's the way that I kind of see things, really, that if people cross boundaries, then we emotionally detach ourselves from them. So we sort of avoid being pulled into things like arguments with blame and guilt traps. So we start to respond with calm neutrality, which is where we were on that conversation earlier. When things happen, or if you get emails or people try and press your buttons or your triggers, rather than respond quickly, just don't respond. Leave it for a day, come back to it, and then respond with that calm, neutral energy instead. So again, energetically, your energy is calm, it's protected, and it's a very neutral response rather than an emotional, reactive response. And the way that helps, I think, really, is it stops the narcissist from feeding from your energy, because they're effectively psychic vampires. And I know that this conversation obviously goes around psychic vampirism, and I know Pink's talked about psychic vampires, but that's effectively what we've kind of got to deal with, really, is people that are looking to vampire, to connect to our energy field and to suck that energy. So if we think about psychic protection, the things that we do and talk about every day on a daily basis, if you're in your protected bubble, then things can't connect to your field and pull that energy from you. But if you start to go into a chaotic state or an angry state or an emotional state because you're being driven by other people, then that field kind of perforates, and that opens up your energy for these kind of psychic vampires, narcissistic people to connect to your field and to feed off of your energy. So, of course, they're looking to get into the to and forwards, the backwards and forwards of an argument of chaos, because that's where they like to be. So, obviously, keeping yourself out of that means that you either don't respond or you respond in a very calm, sort of neutral way, really. And then I think, from my perspective, grounding and shielding, we talk about grounding. I think grounding is one of those conversations that spiritual people have so often, but most people probably don't do. So we talk about being grounded, so we can use deep breathing, we can connect to nature, wait for a walk in nature, we can visualize protective bubbles of light around us, or grounding roots going into the planet from a kind of spiritual perspective. So all of these things kind of help maintain that spiritual sovereignty over our own energy. But grounding yourself and being grounded obviously helps to keep your energy in that kind of neutral space, which is where we want us to be. We want us to be in a neutral space, that we don't overreact, we don't over-respond, and people find it very difficult to trigger us or bring chaos into our life effectively. And then I guess another kind of technique really is to look for support. So find people around you, trusted friends, mentors, therapists, someone that can give you a different perspective and reassurance. Because when you're living with narcissistic people, they could be your children, could be your parents, could be your spouse, your wife, your husband. If you're in the very small circle or around those people, then you are going to do all of the things that we said. You're going to be doubting yourself, you're going to be gaslit continually, you're going to be sort of psychically vampired. So you do need to have that sort of extra external support system that helps you to stay strong and clear. And then I think sometimes, as a last resort, really, knowing when to walk away. So when you're in these sorts of relationships, or when you're with these toxic people, sometimes the healthiest response is not to respond, it's just distance. If the relationship is that toxic and it's draining, abusive, trying to disengage and prioritize your well-being before everything else is a good thing. And Chen says this to us quite often. Chen always talks to Jane and myself, and one of his key kind of conversations is service to self first. So not service to others first, which is the way most people kind of present things. Chen's version is service to self first. So you protect yourself. It's not a selfish thing. It's an essential thing that you need to do, and look after your own energy, look after your mental state, look after how you feel. And if you're in a relationship that isn't working, then walking away is an option that you have. And of course, it is a responsibility conversation. So many people stay in relationships that they know are toxic. They know that they're draining and abusive, but they don't disengage, they don't put boundaries in place, and they don't walk away. And ultimately, everyone has the ability to walk away from something that's not working for you. Yes, obviously it can cause problems and it can cause stress, and obviously if there are children involved, it's more difficult. But sometimes walking away from a toxic, negative relationship will have a better effect on everybody longer term down the road than it currently does whilst you're in that kind of stressful, chaotic state. So I think really my kind of takeaway point personally is you can't really change narcissists. They kind of are what they are. But what you can do is change how you're going to respond to them. And this is the part that you learn from, and you learn about yourself really. So protecting your own peace and strength and energy, and ultimately standing firmly in your own sovereignty is the key. And I guess that is the kind of the conversation really, certainly from my perspective. So I think from a psychological perspective, I don't really think people are born. Jane and I were talking earlier about it actually before this conversation. We were talking about, do you think people are born narcissistic? And we both decided, and Jane's done a bit more research on this than me, because she's obviously had narcissists in her family or in her life. So have I, of course. We all tend to, but she's done quite a bit of research. And she said, no, people aren't born narcissistic at all. Not in terms of having NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. So most research, I think researchers, and certainly from like Jane's perspective and mine, agree that really it develops from a mix of temperament, environment, and kind of early experiences. So childhood problems, inconsistent or bad parenting, trauma, sexual, mental, physical traumas, either excessive praise or criticism can contribute to that as well. And then genetics and temperament, sensitivity of people, impulsivity may make more people vulnerable. So I think, in short, really, certainly from our perspective, we think really people may be born with the traits that predispose them to being narcissistic, but narcissism is shaped by their life experiences, really, and of course their choices they take, choices for the things that they do. And quite often people don't actually take responsibility for those things, for the fact that they've made some bad choices, therefore bad things happen to them. And that kind of, again, is part of that conversation, really. So I'm just going to say hi to Pink Nadine, and obviously Hope is here as well, which is good. I can see your comments in the channel. So thanks for that. So hopefully that kind of gives you my kind of, well, mine and Jane's, really, because a big chat about it earlier, mine and Jane's perspective into NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, and how to deal with people. Because people on this call, people that listen to this podcast, will definitely have someone in their circle that is narcissistic, that's controlling, that's difficult, that causes chaos and stress. And trying to work out how to deal with those people and how to manage your way through, really, is obviously quite difficult. But again, kind of with time, experience and age, you realise that it comes more to the way that you deal with them. They won't change. And I think I've had relationships with narcissistic people, and I used to think that I could kind of make them change. But of course, all that happens is you just become irritated, frustrated, and angry, basically, over the years. They don't change. In fact, they generally get worse. So the narcissistic people that I know that are in our circles, that we have nothing to do with, really, or certainly the least amount as possible, they've only ever got worse over the years. They never got better. They've never accepted responsibility for choices, decisions, and boundaries. They just generally get worse and worse. So the key is to push them further and further out of your circle. That seems to be the way that, certainly the way that we deal with them, and that works. It certainly worked from my perspective. I know it's worked from Jane's perspective too, and I'm sure some of you guys can talk about the same type of thing. Really, that is the way to deal with things. Okay, so with that, let's get Chen in for a chat, see what he has to say, which will be good, because I'm sure you have a very interesting perspective on narcissistic people. Okay, so I'm just going to set my alarm a second. Just bear with me. Clock. Okay, so that's the clock running for Chen, which will be good. Let's grab a quick drink. Jane's talking about the background being fuzzy. I thought the background looked quite good. So let me have a quick look. I think when I move about, obviously the screen kind of comes in and comes out. So I guess that's probably what Jane's referring to. So visual effects. There we go. That's the actual real room that I'm in, which might be less fuzzy, hopefully. So we'll give that a go. For this part, you can still see me, which is good. You still see our little pentagram up behind me, or star. The whole place is covered in stars and hearts, generally, if Jane's got anything to do where we live. So we do get used to seeing these things everywhere. Okay, so with that, I'm going to get Chen to come in, have a chat, and I'll be back in about 25 minutes or something. Okay, so I'll hand over. Good day to you all. It's my pleasure to be here again this week. I do so love these conversations and this particular method of engagement. So I'm getting quite used to being a podcast person, so to speak, having the ability to be sat in front of the technology that we know can go so far, and so many people can connect to our conversations. We can entertain people, we can guide people, we can speak to people. And so many of the people that listen to these podcasts are living in very diverse places across the planet. So many of them are very disconnected from their family, their friends, from other people. So it's so good that we're able to have a channel, an area, a space that we can all connect together, people that are listening to the same messaging, looking for the same level of conversation, something that they're interested in from different ways. And of course, this is something that I do continually explained to young Andrew and Jane is that our guidance and our conversations comes from our perspective. But to get a rounded perspective, the people that are subscribing to and assimilating the information yourselves, you have to listen to different people talking about the same thing. And then, of course, you will resonate with a particular voice, a particular person, a particular message. And this is how things work, really, from a spiritual perspective, is that everything is vibratory frequency. And we talk about this, of course, every week. So we know that vibrational frequency is the conversation, really. So you aligning with people that are speaking in the same way that you understand. Conversation that's simplified, that's not too over dramatic, conversation that's to the point, conversations that's simple to assimilate into your own mental construct. This is what I try to do, and this is what we try to do from our spiritual perspective, is provide information in a simple way that isn't complicated, that's easy to understand. Whether you actually understand the concepts, whether you agree with the concepts, it doesn't really matter per se. And of course, for those people that are skepticism generally is good. Having people that can look at a different side of a picture to promote questions, to push conversations, to push the narrative is obviously good too. So we enjoy all of those things, and I wanted to make it quite clear at the start of this week's conversation that everything we say is an opinion, and you must form your own opinions on the same things that you understand. And of course, everyone has had or is having, of course, a physical experience that listens to these podcasts. So if you've not been around narcissistic people, you may be wondering what the conversation's about. But most people that listen to this will be listening to it because energetically, again, they're connecting to the energy of the conversation. And there will be information in these podcasts that is very productive from a guidance perspective to the person subscribing, and again, assimilating that information into their field. So certainly from my perspective, if we look at the human being, we have a physical human being, as we know. We know that there is a spiritual energy locked inside the frequency of the physical. And that spirit basically is the spirit that animates the physical body. When we take the spirit away, the body, like a bag of bones, falls on the floor, has no use whatsoever. So as soon as someone dies, the spiritual frequency leaves, and therefore that body returns to its carbon-based life form. It's either buried generally, or of course it could be burnt or cremated. So that's the two most common methods for disposal of your physical body when we take away the spirit. So if we think about a person that's being born as a baby, you have a physical body being created by the mother in the womb. The spirit is then incorporated in at some point. Normally after a week or so, there's a spiritual frequency that comes in to that tiny fetus. And then, of course, the fetus starts to grow from a physical perspective, and there's a spirit in there that energetically gets bigger and bigger and then starts to animate that physicality. So, of course, when the child is born, the spirit is already locked inside the body, and therefore you've got an intelligent being that's actually being birthed into the physical space, physical realm, your world. So at this point, there is no narcissism. You don't have a narcissistic baby. Babies aren't born narcissistic. They're born and they're running their program. They run baby version 1, let's say. But baby version 1 is to be very, very loud when it needs something. So if it needs feeding, it screams and shouts. If it needs changing, it screams and shouts. If it's happy, generally for small periods of time to start with, they go to sleep. And then, of course, that cycle continues again. They become hungry, they scream. And, of course, the screaming is designed to push the buttons of the mother to get a reaction, to get fed, or, of course, to get changed if they're being changed because they've soiled themselves. The baby version 1 program is a very simple one with no narcissism whatsoever. And, of course, as time goes by, the baby learns. The more it screams and the more intrusive it becomes to the mother, generally the faster it gets serviced. So that person starts to learn very, very young on, probably within year 1, certainly to year 3, that the more problematic their behaviour to the mother, the more they get serviced, the more they get what they want to get. And of course, that continues. So if the parenting's not particularly good at this point, by year 3, by year 4, then basically everything that the baby does, every time it screams and creates problems and chaos, the mother or the father intervene, give it what they want. You're starting to build this personality. Of course, that personality then is aligned with causing chaos to get what it wants. So if we fast forward maybe to year 10, year 11, by that point, of course, we've had societal guidelines overlaid. That baby is now grown up, has been to school, has been programmed into the school system. The school system basically overlays the things that you can do and the things that you can't do, the acceptable behaviour and the non-acceptable behaviour. And then, of course, when that child goes home to the parents, you've got the same overlay. You've got acceptable behaviour, non-acceptable behaviour. Now, if that child goes through that lifetime from year 10 maybe to year 14 to 15 at teenage years and doesn't really suffer with any particularly negative experience or trauma, abusive behaviour, whether that be physical or sexual, then of course generally you just have habits forming. So that child will become habitual in the way that they'll do things, which could be good, obviously, and could be bad. But if there's a lot of negativity, a lot of trauma that's in that child's life, again, whether that be mental, sexual, physical or emotional, that then starts to change the program, and that child then starts to become very inward looking on itself, feeling like it's always being outdone, feeling like something negative is happening that isn't really happening to its peers, people around it. If there are lots of control and manipulation happening, again, that child will internalize that, but generally keep it quiet. So now you have a child that basically is acting in a very different way from the rest of the programming of other children and peers around. So of course that child gets taken effectively to one side, and we have a very different personality now that starts to grow. That personality is quite manipulative, it's frustrated, it's angry. All of the negative emotions kind of get baked into that personality. So by the time we get to the latter teenage years, narcissistic personality disorder has already been locked in to that person's psyche, really. So they're now running a different program mentally. So they do have these other tendencies that young Andrew discussed earlier. They start to feel more entitled because they've been through bad experiences. They've been through bad things. So therefore they're looking to have good things or better things than other people. They also know that running baby program version 1, attention in any way, whether it be good or bad, was a good thing because they got attention. So if they're in families or they're in circumstances that are not getting attention, they start to do naughty things or create problems so they get attention. They're not particularly bothered about how or the frequency of the attention, whether it's good or bad. They just want attention, generally from the parents, from schools, from society. So you can see we've got this personality now that's starting to behave very differently from normal personalities. And then, of course, they start to look at other people around them that seemingly have a better life, an easier life. And that breeds frustration, anger, resentment, all of the negative emotions again. So you can see that when we fast forward, maybe to year 20, mid-20s, if that behaviour is continued, we now have a person that's running a very, very different emotional construct and program. And that, of course, is what you call narcissistic personality disorder. And once that's been baked in from effectively late childhood through teenage years to the mid-20s, that probably won't change because that program's been running now so long, they've programmed themselves to behave and do things in particular ways. And of course, they're continually looking to get one up on other people, to control, to manipulate. They resent most people. They resent other people with more money, better options, better families, nicer people. So again, they become quite a difficult proponent, really, from a sociology perspective and certainly a cultural perspective in your lives. But of course, they have two faces, a bit like psychopaths that we talked about before. The narcissistic personality disorder has two faces. It has the sweet, nice person that can't do enough for you, but it's always manipulative, always controlling. So even when they're doing nice things for you, they're looking to manipulate and control. They give you things and then take things away from you. Again, this is part of the attention deficit aspect from the childhood program version 1. Again, looking to get continual attention. So everything is attention based. But again, manipulating people to get what they want and how they want things is their core program really they run. So of course, if you're in a relationship with a narcissistic personality disorder person, or someone that has those traits, these are the experiences you're going to have. You're going to continually feel as though you've never got a lock on yourself. You don't have a lock on your relationship. The relationship is up and down continually. You're emotionally challenged and charged. There's chaos in and around your life. Your boundaries are being walked over continually. And then you'll see these people appear to have no empathy. They'll say terrible things. And then they wake up the next day and tell you that they love you. And you can't understand how someone can say such terrible things one day and then the next day wake up and tell you they love you and say positive things. So it's all about continual control, continual manipulation. And obviously, certainly what we see from a spiritual perspective is this energy that's actually quite low in vibration because of the experiences they've been through, because of the challenges they've had in their life and with society. You have a lot of resentment, anger, emotional turmoil locked into that frequency. So they're quite negative people. They may appear positive, but actually their vibration that we see, because of course when I look at people, I don't see the physical like you. I have no eyes. What I see is a vibratory frequency. So we read these people at low frequencies, the angry, negative people, even though they may not be presenting that way from a physical perspective. And this, of course, is where many of you listening will have got caught. You'll have met people that seem to be too good to be true. And of course, we know that if that's the case, it's generally spot on. Someone that's appearing to be too nice and too good, generally it is an act. They're part of a theatre show. They're just doing the things that they know work. They know you want them to do, and that's therefore what they do until they choose to change. So if you're in a relationship with people, which many of you will be, or your parents are narcissistic, then of course it's all about protection. It's all about keeping your energy out of the way of their field. So don't have tentacles to be able to come in, to connect to you, control you, to emotionally change your frequency. So it's about you learning to ground yourself, to put yourself in your psychic and spiritual protected bubble so that you're in there and these people don't have an access point to come in, to find those triggers, to say the horrible, nasty things to you, to cause your emotions to go all over the place and haywire. And then, of course, as soon as they've done that, they can control you. So narcissistic people have to be dealt with a very strong boundary on the outside to keep them as far away from possible. If you can remove them from your life, then so the better. That's even a better method. If you can remove them completely from your sphere, then that's the best thing to do because they won't change. And I think Andrew did actually cover this correctly earlier, that certainly from our perspective, narcissistic people do not change. They can't become good because they're running a different program, because they program themselves to react to circumstances and situations in certain ways that we covered earlier. So you're dealing with something that won't change, it can't change. The only way to deal with it is for you to keep them outside of your frequency, outside of your boundary, and for you to deal with the way that you deal with them. So when they try to push your buttons, when they try to cause chaos in your life, you don't rise, you don't allow them, you remove the trigger, you remove the button. And this, of course, is good conversation for all people, certainly spiritual people, to have and understand, is that everything that you do on a daily basis and all of the people that you come into contact with, keeping people away from you that are going to trigger you in different ways is the core part of that job. So remaining sane, keeping your sanity, keeping yourself emotionally detached from difficult, problematic people, narcissistic people, is the only way to deal with them. And of course, sometimes this means some very difficult conversations. For some people, this means pushing family members away, removing your phone number, removing your access, moving to a different city, a different town, a different locality, putting geographical space between you so that you don't see and meet these people. So even though these might seem extreme choices and extreme things that you need to do, they're the only way to work this situation, because being around narcissistic people, certainly if you're in relationships with them, will never really change. It will be a continual loop of problems, really, and manipulation, controlling problems, and that won't really go away. So you won't end up with a particularly positive life. You're not going to feel happy. You're not going to wake up looking at the sun thinking how lucky and wonderful things are. So detaching yourself, finding boundaries, removing yourself from their space, their situation, is the only way to work with the narcissistic personality disorder. So hopefully, really, from your perspective, I've answered the questions. Really, it's certainly how we see things. Energetically, we can see it because their vibration is low. They're living in an angry, frustrated space. And if it's not going to change and their vibration doesn't come up, they take happy people with a positive vibration and they bring them down to their low frequency. So if you're in relationships with people that you think have the traits of narcissism, just have a notice, just have a think. How do you feel after spending some time with them? Do you find yourself driving home after having a coffee, drained, tired, with a headache, thinking to yourself, why do I do this? Why do I put myself through this? And that is the question. Why do you do it? Because there's nothing wrong with service to self. Young Andrew said earlier, this is my teaching and trait, service to self first, always. So if people don't work for you, regardless of how long you've had relationships with them, regardless of whether they've been your best friends in your life, if they're not working for you now and today, then you erect a boundary, you push them backwards, and you try and get space as much as you can. And you'll notice that your frequency will start to rise. You'll start to wake up feeling happier, better, more positive. So move these people in your circle that are negative, that have a low frequency, out of your circle. And that is the conversation really for today. So on that note, I will bring young Andrew back. It's been my pleasure to have this conversation. Hopefully we've covered narcissism. It's a very simple conversation really, which is why it doesn't particularly take too long, because of course it is just a case of detach and remove and use boundaries. So I will say good day, and we will look forward to the conversation next week. Good day to you all. Okay, so I am back. Chen's early, which is good. Have a quick look at the time. Oh, he's early. Unusually. Okay, so it's going to go back through the conversation. So hi to Miriam. Good to have you with us, Miriam, and Michelle. As usual, Diana, of course, thanks for joining, and Nadine. Nadine's saying great advice. However, after distancing yourself, and then what else can you do to erase the CPTSD you suffer with daily? Well, that's a good question, Nadine. That's the kind of aftercare conversation around you starting to change the way you do things, I guess, and think positively. And, you know, the fact you've taken responsibility and moved these people out of your circle, you should start to feel better. But of course, it's like everything, isn't it? There's always trauma left. There's always chaos left, really. And sometimes we can use meditations, past life meditations, to go back into relationships we've had with some of these people to clear that negativity out. And I guess a lot of it is forgiveness, really. You know, I know from my personal perspective, and certainly James too, we've been involved with narcissistic people in our kind of pre-life before we got together. So most of those people, you know, we don't have anything to do with, but we do kind of forgive them for some of the things that they've done and said, and some of the kind of energy that's been in the mix, really. Because you realise that narcissistic people generally have had a difficult run themselves. Many of them have been through very difficult experiences that kind of forms and formulates them in that way. So of course they're just a kind of, you know, they're the outcome of something that wasn't particularly good to them, just that they then create a whole lot of victims by the way that they do things. And I guess this is the problem, really. It's all about kind of getting to the point that we keep narcissistic people out of our space, put that boundary up, keep them as far away as possible, and effectively just kind of it gives us that breathing space and that place to be positive and to be able to find peace. Because I think what we're all looking for these days, everyone's busy with social media, work, jobs, family. We're all so busy, but finding some peace inside yourself, you don't really want people around you that press your buttons continually, and their chaos kind of overflows into your life. So we know who those people are, and the more we let them into our life, then the more chaotic and problematic it becomes, really. And of course, it is a difficult conversation to take people that are quite close to you generally, and then for you to consciously decide that you don't want anything to do with them anymore and start pushing them out. So kind of, is a difficult thing to do. And we all kind of, I think, acknowledge that moving anyone outside our circle that's been inside our circle, generally family, friends, and people that are quite close, is difficult to do. But then if you want some peace and you want to find that place to breathe, then the difficult things have to be done. And then you look back on it years to come and think, wow, that was, the best things to do. I know from my perspective, in my kind of personal life, there was a problem person. And the only way that got dealt with, really, the best way was to change my phone number. So change my mobile phone number. That person didn't have my phone number. So basically, within the drop of a hat, 30 seconds, you've removed the access. And of course, they tried to find other ways to come in, but effectively, you can keep the doors closed. And I think in the end, I probably changed my phone number 2 or 3 times before eventually that person didn't get my phone number anymore. And that kind of stopped a lot of the problems. And that was a narcissistic person that had all of the traits that we've just been talking about, probably plus a whole load more, really. I look back on that, I think, oh, goodness me, why didn't I do that before? For 10 years, I could have made some choices and done those sorts of things, but I didn't do them. So you get 10 years of misery, really, to be around someone that is difficult. And actually the easiest thing is to effectively just to put the boundary up, change your phone number and kind of walk away. So that's one of my big lessons, really, that I'm happy to kind of share. Just going to say hi to Louise. Louise has joined as well. It's good to have you here, Louise. We're just talking about narcissistic people and how to basically boot them out of our circle effectively. So any of you that have got, or any of you that watch this and catch up, good to put some comments in the Facebook things on things that you've done. What methods have you found to remove narcissistic people from your life? Have you managed to identify narcissism in your circle? And what do you do? What methods do you take? Obviously, my method has been just to basically literally push people out and have nothing to do with them. But obviously, sometimes that's quite difficult. And I think probably, if we're talking truthfully, I think it's probably more difficult for females to do than men. Most men that I know are pretty black and white. And certainly for me, I consider myself to be black or white generally. I used to work in IT, which is kind of black and white job, black and white industry. So if I get pushed a little bit to a point, then I'll make a decision. And that decision's either going to be, I will do this or I won't do this. So there is no kind of middle ground. And I know most guys that I know probably have the same sort of personalities. I think for females and for women, and people that are kind of set up different emotionally, are more connected to family, are more easy to manipulate, because of course they want things to stay together. They want families to be together. They want to keep connections to their children or grandchildren or parents or grandparents or brothers and sisters. Where I think most men are looking for a quiet life, really. I know that I am. So anything that comes into my life that causes chaos, generally the door opens and they get pushed out very, very quickly. And that kind of works for me effectively. So I'm pretty sure anyone that's listening to this that thinks about their own life probably has similar ideas. So Maura is here as well. Hi, Maura. So also have narcissism people isolate us at another form of abuse. Well, yeah, that's the thing, really. Narcissistic people are looking to control, I guess. So one of the things they'll do is they will kind of isolate you from everybody else. And again, you don't kind of see that initially because you're living with that. It becomes normal to spend time with that person. That person controls and manipulates. It's kind of what they do. But I think fast forward down the line, you kind of look back and realize that you were taken away from your friends, your family, the people that you loved, the people that you cared for, and that narcissistic person becomes your controller to a certain degree. And then, of course, once you've been living like that for a long time, and you can actually get rid of them out of your life, or you can move them out on the other side of that boundary, it leaves you lost because you're so used to having the control. What do you do at that point? You've suddenly got to find yourself again. You've got to make your own decisions. You have to make your own choices. Life can be quite difficult when you find yourself in this sort of isolated, situation. And again, we all can kind of understand how difficult that is. So I think that's a really good point, Maura. Thanks for bringing that one up. Okay, I think from my perspective, it probably concludes this chat this week. Again, obviously, Facebook comments, we'll pop this recording up on YouTube. It's on our Facebook channel, and I think anywhere else it goes out on the podcast channels as well. So if you guys are interested, you can obviously pop comments in, give us some feedback. You can drop us emails and things. We're trying to be, one of my kind of agenda items, well, mine and Jane really, from Chen, is to make sure we're creating just content, lots of content that's interesting to people. Some people won't be interested, which is fine. If you're not interested, then not for you. If you're interested, then that's great. But our kind of job from our boss, really, our boss being Chen in this instance, is to create content and get the content out there for people to assimilate, to listen to find guidance with. There's so many people that are struggling these days, and sometimes some of the things that we say, even though we don't really think about what we're saying, it's just a conversation, can help somebody, or it may just stop someone making a really bad decision in their life. And if something that we can do, provides that, then, that's the kind of feedback we obviously like to feel and hear. And that's why we do this work. We're doing the work to try to help people, really, in any way that we can, because we've all been through these difficult situations. And certainly working with the Spirit Guide teams, with Chen, his team, obviously working with Jono, White Hawk, the SRA guys and girls, of course. There's a lot of people now kind of out there that are kind of available, that have the knowledge. We know how to deal with negative things. We can help you in your life. If you've got challenges and things, there's plenty of places you can reach out and connect to a whole manner of people. And if you look at SRA, Spirit Release Academy, there's 96 practitioners now. So there's nearly 100 people that we've trained do work that can help you with your life, clearing chaos from your life, clearing negativity from your life. And there's some exceptional people in that group. There's doctor level people PhDs. There's some very educated, well-rounded people that are part of the Spirit Release Academy groups. So if you're interested, reach out. Again, you can look at the website. If you're interested in training with us, the courses are all up there. Again, we've got a few courses coming up in November, so they're available. And also, we've got a Chen chat. So we've got a worldwide Chen group meditation in next Sunday, actually, October the 5th, I think it is. So if you're interested to come and do a meditation, we're going to do a healing meditation as a starting point, and then normally as a second part of that evening or a couple of hours, we do a kind of worldwide healing meditation for the planet. So Chen calls it thumping the grid, basically. So the idea is that we collectively get a whole load of people together all over the world, and we kind of work with spirit guides, basically take their energy down through people, and we kind of channel that into the planet in these different acupuncture points, and we basically send light around the world with a view to raise the vibration. So it's kind of what we're doing. So if you want to be part of that, hop over to our website. All the info should be on there, and it'll be great to see you next Sunday. And I think with that, it probably concludes today's chat. So thanks for coming, folks, and we'll catch you again next week. Cheers. Bye-bye.